Picture this. You walk into the grocery store with your usual shopping list: milk, bread, eggs, some meat, and fresh vegetables for the week. But when you reach the checkout, the total comes in higher than you anticipated. The carton of milk that used to cost $3 now hovers around $3.20. The whole grain bread has gone up by about 50 cents, and that monthly rent notice for your apartment arrives with another increase that doesn't match the pace of your paycheck. These aren't random or isolated hikes. They're the most noticeable signs of inflation, the economic process that makes your money stretch less far over time. Inflation is the sustained and widespread rise in the prices of goods and services throughout the economy. We're not talking about a single product becoming more expensive because of a temporary shortage, like a bad harvest or a brief supply issue. Instead, it's a broad upward movement that touches nearly everything we buy day to day. In the United States, according to the most recent data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics as of November 2025, the Consumer Price Index, or CPI, rose 2.7% over the previous 12 months. This means, on average, things cost 2.7% more than they did a year earlier. Food purchased at home, like the groceries you put in your cart, increased by 1.9%, while shelter costs, including rent and the equivalent for homeowners, climbed 3.0%. These numbers might sound modest compared to past spikes, but they hit hard because they target the essentials. Consider a typical household spending around $700 a month on groceries. With food at home prices up 1.9% annually, by year's end, those $700 buy roughly what $686 did the year before. The gap adds up: less room in the budget for extras, or the need to switch to cheaper brands, smaller portions, or skip certain items altogether. Rent, which often takes up a big chunk of monthly expenses, follows a similar path. A 3.0% increase on a $1,500 apartment adds $45 more each month, when your salary doesn't rise at the same speed. And for many it doesn't right away. Your real buying power shrinks. The money that once covered basics comfortably now demands constant adjustments. This everyday squeeze is why inflation stirs so much concern. It's not merely a statistic in economic reports. It's the reason your grocery cart holds fewer items for the same amount of cash, or why the landlord's notice feels like an unexpected burden. In the segments ahead, we'll explore the main drivers behind these price increases, how they're precisely measured, and the specific ways they reshape daily choices, from what you cook to how you save, or whether that small weekly treat remains affordable. Understanding inflation begins right here, in the moment you realize your routine now costs more. Picture this. Inflation isn't just a headline number. It's the quiet force that makes yesterday's dollar buy less today. In simple terms, inflation is the sustained increase in the average prices of goods and services across an entire economy over time. When it happens, each unit of currency loses purchasing power, meaning you need more money to acquire the same things. Economists measure it primarily through indexes like the Consumer Price Index, CPI, which tracks a representative basket of everyday items, from food and housing to transportation and healthcare, and calculates the percentage change year over year. This broad rise differs from temporary spikes in one sector, such as a jump in gas prices after a storm. Inflation affects the overall price level, gradually eroding what money can do. Moderate inflation, typically around 1 to 3% annually, is often viewed as beneficial in modern economies. It encourages people to spend and invest rather than hoard cash, since money loses a little value over time, and it gives central banks room to adjust interest rates during slowdowns. The U.S. Federal Reserve, for example, targets about 2% as a healthy long-term goal. But when inflation accelerates, the picture changes. Galloping inflation, double-digit rates year after year, creates uncertainty, discourages long-term planning, and forces frequent price and wage adjustments. Then comes the extreme: hyperinflation, defined as 50% or more per month, where prices spiral so fast that money becomes nearly worthless almost overnight. Societies facing this see their currency collapse, savings evaporate, and trust in institutions shatter. History offers stark reminders of how inflation can spiral out of control. One of the most infamous cases unfolded in the Weimar Republic of Germany during the early 1920s. After World War I, Germany faced massive reparations payments under the Treaty of Versailles. To cover debts and support striking workers during the French occupation of the Ruhr industrial region, the government printed enormous amounts of paper money without backing in goods or services. By late 1923, the exchange rate had plummeted from around 4 marks per US dollar before the war to trillions of marks per dollar. Prices doubled every few days. A loaf of bread that cost a few thousand marks in the morning might require millions by evening. People carried wheelbarrows of cash just to buy basics, and some burned banknotes for heat because firewood cost more. This hyperinflation wiped out middle-class savings, fueled social unrest, and contributed to the political instability that later helped extreme parties gain ground. Another dramatic example came in Zimbabwe from 2007 to 2009. Facing budget deficits, declining production after controversial land reforms, and international sanctions, the government financed spending by printing vast quantities of currency. Inflation soared to staggering levels, peaking at an estimated 79.6 billion% per month in November 2008, making it one of the worst episodes ever recorded. A single US dollar bought trillions of Zimbabwean dollars, and the currency lost all value so quickly that people resorted to bartering or using foreign money like US dollars. The middle class fled, businesses collapsed, and everyday life ground to a halt until the government eventually abandoned its currency. These extremes highlight a core truth. Unchecked money creation without matching economic growth destroys confidence and stability. Yet most inflations remain moderate, shaped by factors like demand outpacing supply or rising production costs. Understanding this range, from gentle annual creeps to catastrophic surges, helps explain why central banks guard against it so carefully, and why the everyday rise in prices we feel at the store connects to much larger historical lessons. The causes of inflation aren't some abstract mystery. They stem from real imbalances in the economy that ultimately push prices higher. The 3 main drivers are demand-pull inflation, cost-push inflation, and monetary inflation. Each works differently, though in practice they often overlap. Demand-pull inflation occurs when the collective desire to buy goods and services outstrips what the economy can produce at that moment. Picture a booming economy. Unemployment falls, wages rise, confidence surges, and people spend more on everything from cars and appliances to vacations and home improvements. Companies can't ramp up output fast enough. Factories run at full capacity. Labor shortages appear. Raw materials get tight, so they raise prices to balance supply and demand. A textbook example played out after the pandemic, when massive fiscal stimulus and pent-up savings fueled a rush for durable goods, like vehicles and electronics, while supply chains remained disrupted. During strong growth periods, such as the late 1990s in the United States or recent post-recovery surges, this dynamic drives broad price increases. Cost-push inflation moves in the opposite direction. Prices rise because businesses face higher expenses first. When key input costs climb, oil, metals, grains, or wages, companies pass at least part of that burden onto consumers to protect their profit margins. A frequent trigger is a spike in oil prices caused by geopolitical conflicts or production cuts, which raises transportation, manufacturing, and virtually every activity that involves moving things. Other sources include wage increases that outpace productivity gains or supply shocks like droughts that drive up food costs. In recent years, trade tensions and energy disruptions have fed into this type of pressure, spreading higher costs through supply chains until they reach the grocery cart. Monetary inflation arises when too much money circulates relative to the goods and services available. According to the quantity theory of money, if the money supply grows faster than real output through excessive printing, unchecked credit expansion, or overly loose policy, each unit of currency loses value, requiring more to purchase the same items. This explains extreme cases like Germany's hyperinflation in the 1920s or Zimbabwe's in the 2000s, where governments funded massive deficits by printing money without corresponding economic growth. In modern economies, central banks monitor the monetary base closely to prevent this, but prolonged excess liquidity, such as large-scale stimulus without matching production, can still generate lasting inflationary pressure. These causes rarely act in isolation. A cost shock can shrink supply and combine with strong demand to amplify the effect, or expectations of future inflation prompt workers to demand higher wages and businesses to preemptively raise prices, creating a self-reinforcing spiral. Central banks counter these pressures by raising interest rates. Higher borrowing costs cool demand, slow money growth, and help bring inflation back down, though sometimes at the expense of economic slowdown. Grasping these root causes makes it clear why a jump in gasoline prices or rent isn't random. It's part of larger forces that ripple through every aspect of daily spending. In the next sections, we'll examine exactly how these pressures are measured and what they mean in practical terms for your personal finances. Chapter 3 dives into how inflation gets measured precisely and what those numbers really mean for everyday life. The main tool in the United States is the Consumer Price Index, or CPI. Calculated by the Bureau of Labor Statistics in the Department of Labor, the CPI tracks price changes in a fixed basket of goods and services that reflects what a typical urban household buys. This basket covers hundreds of categories, weighted by average spending patterns: food and beverages, housing, rent or owner's equivalent, transportation, medical care, education, apparel, recreation, and more. Data collectors check prices monthly from stores, online sources, and bills across over 80 urban areas. The CPI comes out monthly, showing both the monthly change, seasonally adjusted, and the year-over-year percentage shift. According to the latest Bureau of Labor Statistics release on January 13, 2026, covering December 2025 data, the CPI for all urban consumers rose 0.3% seasonally adjusted in December. Over the 12 months ending in December, the All Items Index increased 2.7%, the same rate as the prior period ending November. The core CPI, which strips out volatile food and energy prices, climbed 2.6% annually, marking its lowest level since 2021. What does this translate to in real terms? A 2.7% annual rise means that if a household spent $1,000 a month on the basket's typical items last year, they'd now need about $1,027 to buy the exact same things. Housing, a heavy weight in the index, saw shelter costs, including rent and owner's equivalent rent, jump 3.2% over the year, which is why rent notices or mortgage equivalent burdens feel heavier for so many. Food prices overall rose 3.1%. Groceries at home increased 2.4%, while eating out climbed 4.1%, pushing people to tweak meal plans or cut back on restaurant visits. The CPI isn't flawless. It doesn't capture direct taxes, extreme regional differences, or shifts in consumer habits, but it serves as the benchmark for everything from Federal Reserve policy to cost of living adjustments. When inflation exceeds the Fed's 2% target, as it did in recent years, policymakers raise interest rates to cool things down. For individuals, knowing the CPI helps in salary negotiations, budgeting tweaks, or checking if a raise truly offsets rising costs. In essence, the CPI turns the abstract idea of inflation into concrete figures that mirror changes in the cost of living. Seeing that 2.7% annual rate holds steady signals that money gradually loses purchasing power, guiding choices from weekly grocery runs to long-term financial planning. The The next section will unpack how these measurements hit savings, wages, and debts directly. Inflation doesn't have to catch you off guard. While you can't eliminate its impact entirely, especially with the latest Consumer Price Index showing a steady 2.4% annual rate for February 2026, unchanged from January and the lowest since mid-2025, there are simple, effective strategies to protect your purchasing power and even come out ahead over time. First, build a smart savings habit. Move money out of low-interest checking or traditional savings accounts that earn near zero. Opt for high-yield savings accounts or money market accounts, many of which offer rates between 3.5 and 4.25% as of early 2026. These won't always fully beat inflation, but they narrow the gap significantly compared to letting cash sit idle and lose value. Second, invest for the long haul. Historically, stocks have outpaced inflation over extended periods. Keep money invested in a diversified portfolio. Consider broad index funds tracking the S&P 500 or total market funds. If time is on your side, equities in sectors like technology, utilities, or financials often perform well in moderate inflation environments. Add inflation-resistant diversifiers, real estate through REITs, commodities like energy or precious metals, or Treasury inflation-protected securities, TIPS, which adjust principal with CPI changes. Avoid pulling everything out during short-term dips. Inflation erodes cash far more than temporary market volatility. Third, tackle debt strategically. If you have fixed-rate debt like a mortgage, inflation can work in your favor. You repay with dollars that are worth less over time. But for variable-rate debt, credit cards, adjustable loans, prioritize paying it down quickly, especially as rates stay elevated. Lock in fixed rates where possible for big purchases like cars or homes before borrowing costs rise further. Fourth, boost your earning power. Negotiate raises that match or exceed inflation. Use CPI data in discussions. Build skills for side income or career advancement. Cut unnecessary expenses ruthlessly. Track spending for a month. Cancel unused subscriptions. Negotiate bills. And automate savings transfers first. Small changes compound. Brewing coffee at home instead of buying daily saves hundreds yearly. Fifth, adjust your budget dynamically. Review it quarterly. Prioritize essentials. Build an emergency fund covering 3 to 6 months of expenses in accessible accounts, and consider inflation-protected retirement contributions. Max out employer matches in 401ks, especially with inflation-adjusted options. In conclusion, inflation is a persistent economic reality, not a monster to fear, but a force to understand and manage. From the grocery store frustrations to historical extremes like Weimar Germany or Zimbabwe, we've seen how prices rise due to demand pressures, cost shocks, excess money, and how the CPI quantifies it all at 2.4% today. It erodes purchasing power quietly, squeezes daily choices, and challenges savings and debt, but armed with knowledge, you can fight back. Moderate inflation around 2% encourages growth. Protecting yourself means staying invested, earning more than it takes, and making deliberate choices rather than reacting. Thanks for watching the Econ Lab. If this helped you make sense of inflation and how it hits your wallet, hit that like button, subscribe for more clear breakdowns on money, markets, and the economy, and drop a comment. What's one strategy you'll try first to beat inflation? Share your thoughts. We read them all. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. Your financial future starts with understanding these basics. See you in the next video.